In my series on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, today I'll talk about the second important attribute of dialogic modes of resistance, which is unity for liberation. We have already talked about cooperation, and before that we've already discussed the four main attributes of what Freire calls the anti-dialogic modes of controlling the people. Today I will read from page 172 to 174, and as always, I'll first read a part of the chapter and then come back and talk about it. So let's go read the first few paragraphs of Unity of Liberation. Whereas in the anti-dialogical theory of action, the dominators are compelled by necessity to divide the oppressed, the more easily to preserve the state of oppression, in the dialogical theory the leaders must dedicate themselves to an untiring effort for unity among the oppressed, and unity of the leaders with the oppressed in order to achieve liberation. The difficulty is that this category of dialogical action, like the others, cannot occur apart from the praxis. The praxis of oppression is easy, or at least not difficult, for the dominant elite, but it is not easy for the revolutionary leaders to carry out a liberating praxis. The former group can rely on using the instruments of power. The latter group has this power directed against it. The former group can organize itself freely, and though it may undergo fortuitous and momentary divisions, it unites rapidly in the face of any threat to its fundamental interests. The latter group cannot exist without the people, and this very condition constitutes the first obstacle to its efforts at organization. It would indeed be inconsistent of the dominant elite to allow the revolutionary leaders to organize. The internal unity of the dominant elite, which reinforces and organizes its power, requires that the people be divided. The unity of the revolutionary leaders only exists in the unity of the people among themselves and in turn with them. The unity of the elite derives from its antagonism with the people. The unity of the revolutionary leadership group grows out of communion with the united people. The concrete situation of oppression, which dualizes the I of the oppressed, thereby making the oppressed person ambiguous, emotionally unstable, and fearful of freedom, facilitates the divisive action of the dominator by hindering the unifying action indispensable to liberation. So there are quite a few instructive things in the passage that I just read. First of all, Freire, of course, is offering unity of liberation against the divide and rule aspect of the anti-dialogical mode of doing things. And he's basically highlighting what most of us already know, that while it's easier for the dominant group to maintain a unity because their interest is connected to the status quo, it's harder for the revolutionary group to actually develop and retain a unity. So one reason it is hard to create and maintain a unity is because it cannot be implemented top-down, and the leaders must work with the people to create it. Now the people, that duality that Freire is talking about, we have discussed it earlier too, that I, the subjectivity of the people, is split. How is it split? It is split because they've always lived in an oppressive order. So they perform their individual identities, but those identities are structured by the dominant order. Hence, while they live in this world, they live in this world as their identities are constructed by the dominant, hegemonic, and power structures. So before any revolutionary movement can be launched, or before the leaders and the people come together and unite against the oppressive order, the oppressed first must realize their reality, must study it as an objective reality. We did this in chapter 3, right? We discussed about how to develop a curriculum. How will the oppressed begin to see the reality in which they live, objectively study it, and then realize what it does to them, what their space is in it, and in the process then develop an identity in opposition to what has been imposed on them. There are other constraints as well when people are so deeply dehumanized. They don't know any other system. Their identities are connected to whatever mythologies and cosmologies that system has imposed or used. They could be religious, they could be social, they could be a form of fatalism. But the passages that I just read, what Freire is highlighting is that while it's important to know that unity is crucial to the success of a revolutionary movement, it is easier for the dominant groups to come together to safeguard their interest, even if they disagree with each other, and then unleash the power, both hegemonic and dominant, against the people to safeguard their interest. To develop a collective unity amongst the people and their leaders, since it is a process in which leaders must seek the consent of the people, it is harder. And it is also harder because the dominant group will try to disrupt that process at every stage. So there are inherent problems in creating that unity, but there are external pressures that forestall any attempts at forming a united front. Now, this is not really far-fetched. In the 21st century America, you can see this already. On a smaller scale, whenever a business or a large corporation, when they try to unionize, the corporations close ranks, right? They go to the courts, they litigate, they have the money to do that. They try to coerce the workers into not talking about unions or not even thinking about unions. They use all the pressure tactics to make sure that a union or a new union doesn't emerge. They have the resources to do so, whereas at the workers' level, even if the national leadership comes and joins a local group of workers, there are divisions amongst the workers: race, class, ethnicity, religion. So the work of creating unity amongst the workers is constant, takes a longer process, takes more communication and dialogue, and has to withstand whatever is thrown at it by the dominant group. So that's what he's talking about in this section of developing anti-dialogical resistance strategies, and we're talking about unity for liberation. Let us read a few more paragraphs and then I'll come back and discuss it. Further, domination is itself objectively divisive. It maintains the oppressed I in a position of adhesion to a reality which seems all-powerful and overwhelming, and then alienates by presenting mysterious forces to explain this power. Part of the oppressed I is located in the reality to which it adheres. Part is located outside the self in the mysterious forces which are regarded as responsible for a reality about which nothing can be done. The individual is divided between an identical past and present, and a future without hope. He or she is a person who does not perceive himself or herself as becoming, hence cannot have a future to be built in unity with others. But as he or she breaks this adhesion and objectifies the reality from which he or she starts to emerge, the person begins to integrate as a subject, an I, confronting an object reality. At this moment, sundering the false unity of the divided self, one becomes a true individual. To divide the oppressed, an ideology oppression is indispensable. In contrast, achieving their unity requires a form of cultural action through which they come to know the why and how of their adhesion to reality. It requires de-ideologizing. Hence, the effort to unify the oppressed does not call for mere ideological sloganizing. The latter, by distorting the authentic relation between the subject and objective reality, also separates the cognitive, the affective, and the active aspects of the total, indivisible personality. The object of dialogical liberation action is not to dislodge the oppressed from a mythological reality in order to bind them to another reality. On the contrary, the object of dialogical action is to make it possible for the oppressed, by perceiving their adhesion, to opt to transform an unjust reality. Since the unity of the oppressed involves solidarity among them, regardless of their exact status, this unity unquestionably requires class consciousness. However, the submersion in reality which characterizes the peasants of Latin America means that consciousness of being an oppressed class must be preceded, or at least accompanied, by achieving consciousness of being oppressed individuals. Okay, so in the part that I just read, the I of the people, the individuals, is split, right? And it is adhering, or it is in adhesion stage. We have talked about adhesion before, but basically all that it means is that part of that I lives in the world, right? But it is determined by external forces. It adheres to the system within which it exists. To truly liberate themselves, the people must stop this adhesion, this adherence to the mysterious system that he talks about. It could be religion, it could be fatalistic way of saying this is our lot in life, especially when he's talking about the Latin American peasants and their idea that that is their lot in life. So the first step then is to stop adhering to the old system, and in the process then learn their own reality objectively, or learn the objective reality. What does he mean by that? Okay, so let us dwell a little on this sentence. But as he or she breaks this adhesion and objectifies the reality from which he or she starts to emerge, the person begins to integrate as a subject, an I, confronting an object reality. At this moment, sundering the false unity of the divided self, one becomes a true individual. Now this is crucial. We learned about this in chapter 3, where he discusses how to develop a curriculum. So we're talking about a human subject who is divided. So first of all, who believes that whatever the world it is in which he or she exists is natural, and this is their place in it. Now that is a person adhering to a larger system. How to learn the world objectively We learned it in chapter 3 through pictures, through looking at the world as a piece that you want to study in a detached manner, something that is not natural, which is constructed. After the people, as individuals, have looked at the world in which they live critically, analyzed it, found out who holds the power, why is their position the way it is when their self, which was externally controlled, will reconcile with itself and know what's going on. Now, there is another reference where he talks about de-ideologizing people. So, in the classical Marxian sense, de-ideologizing means that people learn that whatever their belief system is through an ideology, and the idea is if we remove that ideology, they will see the real. But what Freire is saying is no, we can't just say remove this ideology and then move into this one. That is not going to help the people become liberated or become individuals to a point where they can then unite. What he's saying is that we have to figure out a way, which he has explained in chapter 3, for people to critically analyze the reality in which they exist, remove the ideological moorings of their existence in it, and then begin to transform the reality. Not change ideologies, but to start working to transform the reality. And that is the purpose of the revolutionary struggle. Not to replace one ideology with another, but to dispel whatever the ideology had wrought, to remove it, and then become the kind of individual subject who knows what's going on, why their lives are the way they are, and then collectively in unity begin to transform the reality, to transform the world. And it is at that stage then that the unity for liberation will begin to emerge. Going to the last paragraph that I read, since the unity of the oppressed involves solidarity among them, regardless of their exact status, this unity unquestionably requires class consciousness. However, the submersion in reality which characterizes the peasants of Latin America means that consciousness of being an oppressed class must be preceded or at least accompanied by achieving consciousness of being oppressed individuals. Now, this is crucial. He's particularizing Latin American peasants with whom he actually was dealing. In classical Marxism, we look at the world from the point of view of class interest. So the emphasis is on class consciousness. We are the proletariat. This is what is happening to us. What he's saying is that the problem in Latin America is that the individual, what to think of becoming aware of their class consciousness, we have to first do the work of the individual, developing their own consciousness as individuals. And that can only be accomplished by studying the reality, looking at it critically, objectively, then looking at your own place in it. And once they start thinking of themselves as individuals in a given system of reality which they understand, that must be developed alongside of class consciousness, if not before. So that's the distinctive point that he's making in what we just read. So overall, in the passages that I read today, we are working towards how to create unity for liberation. Unity for liberation is the second attribute of the dialogical praxis for revolution. And it is offered against divide and rule. Cooperation was the first one that he elaborated and that we have talked about in our previous conversations. So I'm going to leave it at this. I hope this kind of explains what I read today. We are still on Unity for Liberation, and I'll continue reading more in the next conversation that we have, and then build on today's conversation and see what kind of deeper understanding can we gain from it. So that's all I have today. Thank you so much. I hope this is useful to you. Let me know what you think. Please do share if you have ever encountered a situation where you had to build a Unity as a group, as a class, as workers, and what problems did you have. Share your thoughts and ideas. And as always, please be kind, take care of each other, and I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.